All right, welcome back everybody to Chapter 6, Field Worker Safety. This one is going to touch on how to keep field workers safe, laws and regulations behind field workers, what they do, and how it relates to pesticides. This chapter is pretty similar to the last one. There's kind of some repetition, but ultimately field workers are those that work in fields which may be treated. So, picking almonds or grapes or whatever it may be that requires manual labor. That is a field worker. They require certain amounts of training beforehand, and there are additional regulations and laws for those workers who are working in treated fields. So we'll touch on all of that in this chapter. Kind of some repeats from the last chapter too, but let's get into it. Firstly, fieldworker general safety requirements. Regulations required for employers include providing. So what must employers provide field workers? The pesticide safety training. They must display pesticide application information, application notification and field posting, setting up decontamination facilities, and providing hazard communication. While PCAs and RPFs are providing crop advisor tasks, they are exempt from field worker emergency medical care, field worker decontamination facilities, field entry after scheduled or completed pesticide application, and PPE requirements. So obviously PCAs and RPFs are usually the person in charge of crop advising for field workers when they are out there working and maybe the field has been treated, but when they are doing these tasks, then they are exempt from maintaining visual and direct contact over the field workers, and that makes sense. You got emergency medical care is extremely important. You wouldn't want to be trying to do two tasks at once, decontamination facilities, and so on. And lastly, we have employer responsibilities. They must train their employees, plan emergency medical services, know who is qualified to be in treated areas, and supply decontamination facilities. So first thing, we've got hazard and communication training, field worker training requirements for hazard and communication training. Employer responsibilities. Employers must assure employee field workers have been trained in pesticide safety before being allowed to work in a treated field and must be trained annually. That makes sense. You want to make sure that these field workers have the necessary training before they go out there into these hazardous areas. And then that repetitive cycle of being trained every single year maintains that awareness and the depth of knowledge needed for them to work. Certified applicators and employees trained as applicators are considered trained field workers. Employers must maintain training records for each employee that works in a treated field. Records must contain the date and extent of initial and subsequent training, employee's printed name and signature, title and source of the training materials used, employer's name, trainer's name, and their qualifications. Training records must be made accessible to employees at a central location and must be maintained for 2 years. Training must be conducted in a manner that is understood by all employees. So make sure that they're speaking in the language that they can understand. If they may have trouble reading or something, then make sure that you're giving auditory training. Or if they have trouble hearing, then give them written training, whatever it may be. Just make sure that they understand all of it. And it must be presented orally from written materials or audio visually using non-technical terms, so they can't use all these fancy terms that these people might not have a background in understanding. And it must be in a place that is reasonably free from distractions. So, no doing the training in the warehouse surrounded by forklifts. So that kind of makes sense. Reading communication training continued. Who are qualified trainers? So these are the people who are qualified to train field workers and allow them to be considered fully trained. We have California certified commercial or private applicators, persons holding a valid county biologist license in pesticide regulation or investigation and environmental monitoring issued by the California DPR, or California Department of Food and Ag. Farm advisors employed by UC Cooperative Extension issued by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Persons who have completed an instructor trainer program presented by the UC statewide IPM project and other instructor training programs provided by DPR. California licensed PCAs, California registered professional foresters, and trainers qualified in some way that is approved by the DPR. All right, the required training topics for field workers. Prior to working in treated field workers must be trained on the following topics regarding pesticide safety: where and in what forms pesticides may be encountered, treated surfaces in the fields, residues on clothing, so on, potential hazards that pesticides present to field workers and their families, all of the acute chronic delayed effects, sensitization events, or effects, routes by which pesticides can enter the body. Let's see, dermal, ocular, oral, and respiratory. Signs and symptoms of overexposure, which we've talked about previously. Routine decontamination procedures when working in a treated field and the employer's responsibility to provide decontamination supplies. Wear work clothing that protects the body from pesticide residues when working in treated fields and wash them separately. How SDS sheets provide hazard, emergency medical treatment, and other information. The hazard communication program requirements. First aid and emergency decontamination procedures, including emergency eye flushing techniques and other methods. How and when to obtain emergency medical care. Prevention, recognition, and first aid for heat-related illness. Restricted entry intervals and what posting means. Employer responsibility to keep workers out of application exclusion zone. That employees must be at least 18 years or old. Employers are prohibited from allowing or directing any employee to handle pesticides unless they've been trained. They do not take pesticides or the containers home from work. Potential hazards to children and pregnant women from pesticide exposure. How to report suspected pesticide use violations. And employee rights, including the right to personally receive info about pesticides that they may be exposed to, for the physician or representative designated to receive information about those pesticides, to be protected against retaliatory action when exercising their rights, and to report suspected use violations to the DPR or County Agricultural Commissioner. A lot of topics here. Pretty similar to the other ones for pesticide applicators, maybe more so focused on how to avoid. It's pretty similar, just a few more things. Go ahead and compare them side by side, maybe get a good understanding of why they're different or how they're different. Hazard and communication training continued. Field worker hazard communication employer requirements. Hazard communication regulations require employers to identify workplace hazards, to inform employees about the hazards they face, and make sure that they understand the procedures they must follow to avoid them. When employees are working as field workers in a treated field, field employers must display a copy of the Pesticide Safety Information Series Leaflet A9, Pesticide Safety for Farm Workers. It must be available to read in language employees understand. And if there's any changes, they must be updated on the PSIS-A9 within 24 hours. Operators of the property must maintain the following documents in a central location: pesticide use records for all the pesticides that have been applied to the field in the last 2 years, a safety data sheet for each pesticide listed in the pesticide use records. Operators must provide any record, document, or information regarding pesticide regulations within 48 hours of request. Operators must inform employees of availability and location of pesticide use records, PSI SA9 and SDS. Okay, employers must inform employees about their right to access information about pesticides they've been exposed to, that they are protected against discharge or other discrimination for exercising their rights, and any changes to central location of any of the above documents. So one of the main important things is that operators of the property must provide the use records and the safety data sheets at a central location, and that those use records must contain everything that's been applied within the last 2 years. That's pretty important. So that's another reason why you want to maintain your pesticide use records for 2 years. Other than that, it is illegal to throw them away before that. Ultimately, it's good to have them on hand. You know, nowadays you could do the electronic method and just keep them all together, so you're always protected against, liability and so on. So you have all of them, and you know when and what was applied and where. So it's good to have those permanently, but legally you must have them for up to 2 years. And a safety data sheet, which goes into more detail about all the safety information for each chemical. Additionally, we also talked about the A9, which is the pesticide safety rules for farm workers. As we talked about previously, the A8 is the pesticide safety rules for pesticide applicators. So definitely know the difference between those two. Fieldworker hazard communication, employer's requirements, application-specific information. Completed PSIS A9 must include a specific description of the location of application-specific information. That description should guide employees to documents without the need of aid. When employees work in a treated field on property used for commercial or research production of agricultural plant commodity, the operator must display crop or site treated and identification of this treated field, dates and times the pesticide application started and ended, the restricted entry interval, the product name, US EPA registration number and active ingredients, the spray adjuvants product name and California registration numbers, and the SDS for the applied pesticides. This information must be displayed when operator of the property receives notice of completed application and before field workers can enter the treated field. Yep, when employees are working in treated fields, the operator must always display all of these. It's extremely important that they do so because they are required by law. And like other documents, it's pretty similar to all the other things that go on it. Maybe a few less things than some and a few more things than others. Yep. Emergency medical care. Emergency medical care must be planned in advance by employer, just like for applicators. Employer must locate medical facility for all employees to be treated. It is on the employer to ensure that their medical needs are taken care of. The employer must ensure employees be informed of the name and location of the medical facility and doctor for emergency care, receive transportation, cannot drive themselves if they've been exposed or potentially been exposed, must have an outline from employer for the procedures that employees should follow to get care, and are immediately taken to doctor with suspected pesticide illness. In the event of emergency medical care, the employer must provide medical personnel with the copies of the SDS, pesticide product name, US EPA registration number, and active ingredients, circumstance of application or use of pesticides, and the circumstances that could have resulted in exposure to these pesticides. So the safety data sheet, extremely important, lays out all the chemical toxicities, hazards, and ways that it can get into the body and their exposure routes or likely exposure routes. The pesticide product name, the common name for it, or usually that will be enough. And then the EPA registration numbers for more specific documents online, and the active ingredients, which lists all of the chemicals which are doing the work of the pesticide. And then obviously you want to have the circumstances of application or use of pesticides, so why you're using them. This could denote, what method you're using, how you're using it, where you're using it, which can all give clues as to how that exposure occurred or how serious it might be, and then the circumstances that could have resulted in the exposure. And decontamination facility requirements. A decontamination facility must be located within 1/4 mile from the nearest point of vehicular access to field workers and cannot be in an area that is being treated or under entry restrictions. It must contain 1 gallon of water for each field worker and 3 gallons for early entry, soap, and single-use towels. So just like the pesticide applicators, it must be located within 1/4 mile from the nearest point of vehicular access. Right. Entry restrictions and requirements, field work during pesticide application. An employer can't direct a person other than applicators to enter or remain in a treated field or application exclusion zone, which is an area in which no pesticide is applied and only the applicator can enter. An AEZ must be established during the application as outdoor production, 100 feet from application equipment for aerial air blast, fumigant, smoke, fog, or fine spray, 25 feet from application if sprayed 12 inches from soil, and in enclosed spaces, the entire enclosed space plus unsealed adjacent areas when a space treatment is being done or labeling requires respiratory protection until ventilation. The entire enclosed space when pesticide is applied using fine spray until ventilation is met, and treatment site plus 25 feet in all direction if spray is at 12 inches from soil. The restricted entry interval. REI is a period of time after a crop or commodity has been treated with a pesticide when restrictions on entry are in effect to protect employees from potential exposure to a hazardous level of pesticide residue. So each pesticide has its own REI, which is displayed on the label in agricultural use, and that will ultimately determine how long you have to stay away from a given pesticide. Each day referenced in the REI is considered to be 24 hours after completion of application. If there is more than one REI, then the longer REI must be followed. Social adjustments to be made according to 3 CCR 6772. When using 2 or more organophosphates, use the longest REI plus 50% of the next longest. So if you had one with 14 days and one with 2 days, then you would have 14 plus 1 days, because it's the 14 days of the longest plus half of the second longest, which is 2 days, so 1. So 15 days REI. If there is no foliage on plant and crop is less than 4 inches tall, the REI listed in 6772 can be halved, but cannot be shorter than REI on the label. REI must be shortened to listed label length upon approval of CAC under certain conditions. Re-entry after pesticide application. Employers can't direct anyone under 18 years old to enter a treated field during the REI. The employer cannot direct any employee to enter or remain in a treated field until REI on label or regulation has expired, whichever is longer. Under certain conditions, employers can instruct employees to do early entry tasks. For early entry, employers must train that employee as a field worker or handler, provide additional training information, and follow additional PPE and decontamination requirements for early entry. Requirements for early entry training. Employers must ensure employees have an understanding of the following topics: the location of early entry area, pesticide applied, date and time the REI begins and ends, specific restrictions and conditions pursuant to 3 CCR section 6770 about the work activity to be performed, pesticide product labeling, precautionary statements related to human hazards, symptoms of pesticide poisoning, emergency first aid and decontamination procedures for pesticide injuries or poisonings, including emergency eye flushing techniques, how to obtain emergency medical care, prevention, recognition, and first aid for heat-related illness if PPE is used in accordance to that. Location of the PSIS leaflets A8 and A9, the need for use and care of required PPE, that clothing and PPE may be contaminated, instructions for removing and storing the clothing and equipment and laundering that equipment, and the importance of washing thoroughly at the end of each exposure period. So yeah, this is on top of the other training manual, and it's more specific about everything that you need to know before the early entry into the site with a given pesticide. So very important stuff to know because you're entering it at when it is more toxic to you and to humans and just in general. So there's higher risk involved, higher hazard, higher toxicity of the pesticide. So these regulations are put in place to ensure that people are taken care of to try to mitigate that risk to some extent. Requirements for early entry workers, PPE. Employers must provide all required PPE, its maintenance, and its cleaning. PPE is replaced when it can't be repaired or cleaned, inspected by employer before daily use, kept separate from personal items, cleaned and dried, kept and washed separately from other clothing. PPE requirements meet 3 CCR. Employees use all PPE correctly. PPE remains the property of the employer, and employees do not take it home. Employer informs anyone cleaning or laundering PPE that it may be contaminated, hazardous, and how to properly handle and clean it. Now, requirements for early entry workers decontamination. Employer must assure that the pesticide labeling requires eye protection, early entry workers have at least 1 pint of eye flush water, not fish water, at least 3 gallons of water per employee, soap and clean or single-use towels, at least 1 change of coveralls, and clean, pesticide-free place for storing personal clothing, putting on PPE, and taking off PPE at the end of the exposure period. All right, requirements for early entry workers, tasks they can do. The exceptions during which an employee can work in the field under an REI is to conduct pesticide handling activities, including soil incorporation, if they use the pesticide handler PPE listed on the pesticide labeling and are trained as a handler. For no contact activities, no contact with anything that has been treated, including soil, water, air, equipment, or plant surfaces. Inhalation exposure must not exceed any pesticide product labeling standard, or for indoors that ventilation has been met. Employees may enter a treated field during the REI specified on the label to conduct limited contact activities, which are necessary and unforeseen only if the following occur. Labeling does not require posting or oral notification. At least 4 hours have elapsed since application. Inhalation exposure does not exceed pesticide product labeling. Exposure is minimal and limited to the feet, legs, hands, and forearms. Employees wear early entry PPE specified on the product labeling for workers or as specified in regulation. Each employee spends no more than 8 hours in a 24-hour period, and no hand labor activities are performed. Last, we have short-term high-contact activities. To perform activities other than hand labor, pesticide handling, or limited contact activities, so long as at least 4 hours have elapsed since application. Inhalation exposure must not exceed any pesticide product labeling standard, or for outdoors that ventilation has been met. Employees wear early entry PPE specified in the label, and each employee spends no more than 1 hour in a 24-hour period. Yep, so those are the 3 different kinds of activities which can be conducted by early entry workers in a restricted entry interval area, which has been sprayed and still has that active. I would seek to know the hours that they can work in these areas and what they can do. I'd say that's probably the most important thing, and just generally that there is no contact, limited contact, and short-term high contact activities which can be done. Notification and posting. Notice of scheduled application requirements. When a pesticide is scheduled to be applied to a field for commercial or research production of an ag commodity, the operator must inform all employees and contractors of scheduled pesticide and give the notification to any person likely to be within a quarter mile of the field on the date of the REI's beginning. Super important. When they are scheduling these applications, everyone who's in that surrounding area should know, along with people who they work with. And that's important for making sure nobody's going in those areas, and then making sure that, if it's required, giving oral and written notification, posting signs at all likely access points, and making sure no one is entering those areas. So oral and written notification requirements. If the field is posted with a written notice, then oral notification is not required unless labeling requires both oral and written notification. This would be located in the agricultural use requirements on the label. Oral notifications must be given in a way that all notified people understand and must include the date of the scheduled application, the description and location of the field to be treated, and instructions to stay out of the field to be treated, and the application exclusion zone until authorized by the operator of the property. Field posting requirements. Operators must ensure warning signs are posted around treated fields when required by the label. The application is in an entirely closed space. Application is in a partially enclosed space where REI is greater than 4 hours. REI is greater than 48 hours for outdoor applications, and that's always required when using minimal exposure pesticides with signal word danger being applied through irrigation or as a fumigant, and not required if no employee will enter work within 1/4 mile of the field or enclosed space during application or REI duration. California warning signs. This is important. California warning signs must have the words danger, peligro, pesticide, and pesticidas. Sorry if my pronunciation was bad. And it must appear in the upper portion of the sign, while the words keep out and no entre must appear in the lower portion. It must be readable from 25 feet away. I recommend that you memorize that. Just a hunch. And the colors and letters must contrast the background. When the sign is used for greater than 7 days REI, the following information must appear in the lower portion of the sign. Date when entry will become unrestricted, name of the operator of the field, and field identification, if any. Must be posted no earlier than 24 hours prior to application and must be removed within 3 days after expiration of REI. Must be visible from all usual points of entry. Must be posted within 100 feet of labor camps. And if it's next to an unfenced public right-of-way, then signs must be posted less than 600 feet intervals. So you can't post the signs greater than 600 feet. I recommend knowing all those numbers. Those are very important. So especially the distances. Along with this, the REI must be posted 24 hours prior to that application so that people are aware that it's going to occur, and then removing it 3 days after the REI has expired so that they don't think it's still treated. And then the fact that it has to be visible from all areas it may be entered. and that it has to be 100 feet away from labor camps and the unfenced public right-of-way. This is the last slide. The notice of completed application requirements. After a pesticide is applied to a field for commercial or research production of agricultural commodity, the operator must maintain a written record of the notice of completed application, including the location of the treated site, including the site ID number, acreage, and treated, the pesticide product name, US EPA reg number, and active ingredients, the spray adjuvant product name and California registration number, the date and time the application started and ended, any applicable REI and pre-harvest interval, unless a PCA recommendation was provided to the operator of the property saying otherwise. This information must be provided to anyone with prior knowledge that will be on the property and within a quarter mile of the treated field. And it must include the location description of the treated field, the time during which entry is restricted, and instructions not to enter the treated field until the REI expires. All right, so that's this chapter, field worker safety. We got one more chapter after this to do, and then that's it for this book. So I recommend everyone goes through and reads the book themselves. There's a lot more information. Unfortunately, it's a lot. Even though it's not a very long book, it's very dense, and the material can be kind of hard to get through at times with how dry it is. But hopefully this helps you guys, and good luck studying. See you in the next one.